Hi, Ken.
Hey,
Um, so thanks for finding the time to speak with us. We're very excited about this conversation. So just we start. So you're based in DC, correct?
that's right. I'm the
I-
chief economist for Associated General Contractors of America, which is based in Arlington, Virginia. But these days I'm working from home like so many people.
Exactly, like all of us, right? You can see my background. And so tell me a little bit, first of all, about AGC. I mean, are you a lobbying group? Is that why you're in Washington, DC? Are you much big? As far as I know, you're much bigger, but we'd love to hear from you. What is AGC? What do you do? Anything you want to share?
Sure, AGC is the leading national construction trade association. We have over 27,000 member companies that do every kind of construction other than single family home building, as well as suppliers of equipment, goods, and services of all types. They
So
belong through a network of 89 chapters that span the country from Maine to San Diego and out to Hawaii, and from Alaska to South Florida and over to Puerto Rico.
Oh,
And
so
it, it,
27,000 businesses, not
that's right.
individuals. How many
That's right.
members individually do you guys have?
Well, it's a company membership kind of association,
Yeah.
and so the companies range from single member consulting or service firms to companies that have tens of thousands of employees working in just about every state and doing many different kinds of construction. So AGC of America focuses on federal issues, government agencies, Congress, of course, and the White House. But we also provide a wide range of services, of training programs, meetings, committees that can get together to discuss things of mutual interest for contractors and also to support those 89 chapters, each of which have their own staffs.
And you work both with union and non-union
That's right. We
companies?
we really span the range of construction arrangements. So we have some chapters in the Northeast and midsection of the country that are almost entirely union or maybe entirely union, and then many other parts of the country non-union completely, and some are more of a mix.
Yeah, wow. That's what a great opportunity for us to find a very broad uh, sense of what's happening, especially because as is your background construction? Is it
Not at all.
economics? Like, okay, good. So tell us about your personal, like, how did you get to AGC and you know,
Well, I've been at AGC for almost 20 years, and in fact, it's a day that our CEO hired me then and is still there. Steve Sander says he'll never forget. I started on September 10th, 2001.
wow,
And that
wow.
was actually a good day to start because we had two of our chapter executives from around the country in for orientation. And I got to sit on their side of the table, meet the entire staff, hear what each department did in a very organized fashion. But then, of course, the next day, the whole country and the economy changed. People started asking me, well, what's going to happen to the economy? What's it mean for different kinds of construction? And while I'd never worked in construction before, I had worked with a somewhat similar trade association. I spent 13 years as vice president and chief economist of American Trucking Associations. And so I knew the kinds of data sources that I could turn to find out what was happening to construction employment, construction spending, started looking into price indexes. There are a whole bunch of producer price indexes that relate to construction products and even to bid prices of contractors. And so I've been putting out that sort of information now for almost 20 years, as I say.
Wow, that's what a great also you have some background in trucking, which is we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but the whole logistic nightmare everybody's experiencing right now. So you understand how, the trucking part and the construction part too, right? I mean, it's a huge so what does your day-to-day looks like? I mean, for you in your role?
Well, these days, there are a lot of media calls asking about construction costs. Certainly, lumber has been a big concern for anybody who's building a house or remodeling one. Just lately, air conditioning units, and that's because obviously we're heading into the summer season. And I'm not a specialist in any particular product, but I do get a lot of information from those member companies. They forward to me dear valued customer letters that they get from producers saying, oh, we've really tried hard to hold the line on prices, but we're just going to have to stick it to you starting next month. other kinds of information from both government and private sources. I'm a past president and still very active in my professional association, the National Association for Business Economics. And so I'm in contact with economists who work for many types of companies and associations, government agencies, think tanks. And I also am the co-founder of a meeting group called the Tax Economists Forum. So I hear a lot about analyses of tax policy ideas and so forth. So I'm really pulling in information from a wide range of sources inside and outside of construction. And having grown up in Washington, D.C. and been interested in government and federal politics all my life, I also try to assimilate that information, distill it all in a way that I hope is useful to contractors and to other people who want to follow the industry, media, public officials, and so forth. So in addition to talking to reporters, I've been doing a lot of briefings for owner groups, whether it's private developers or government agencies, contracting and budget officers have to figure out, well, how much should we ask for in our budget request to cover the cost of a new military base or a cleanup of a nuclear weapons development site. Some pretty tough questions that
Yeah.
I don't pretend to have the answers, but at least I can give them some information I hope they
And the
find useful.
indication. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And Ken, so it's interesting because no, so Amass is a B2B marketplace for construction materials. So I've been a developer for 20 years, so I was hands-on construction, but I really wanted to um, uh, dive into the world of construction material. We do not know it's going to be the most substantial element of our conversation because, but it is a very old school business. Most people buy from the local suppliers over the phone, and we really need to transform it. So I really kind of want to dive into that world of construction material. But before I do that, as someone who built for many, many years, there's element of labor, there's element of construction. And please correct me if you're seeing it differently. Uh, it seems like the labor conversation was the dominating conversation last few years because of immigration policies and other reasons. Do you still see labor costs a fundamental challenge to construction companies?
Labor availability has been an issue for decades, and there are brief periods when it drops off the number one position, either because the work has dried up and so contractors don't need as many workers and maybe they can get them more easily from other firms that don't have any business going on right now, or in the current situation, there's some of that, but even more, it's been superseded by a still hotter issue of materials. But absolutely, the industry has had an issue for decades, just as trucking has had, of attracting workers at a time when students are being told, if you want to get ahead, go to college and don't take that dirty, dead end, dangerous job. Well, construction actually has a strong and improving safety record, and it has a terrific record of providing a ladder for people who come in at the bottom and climb all the way to
Yeah.
the top of running their own company. And meanwhile, paying much more than the median wage for people with a given level of experience or education.
Yeah, we pay six figures to some of our site managers in New York City, non-union, but still,
Mhm.
those are the numbers. You can make a really good living when I was still in construction. So let's just stay in labor for a second because that's just interest for me. Um, what's your solution? I mean, what Ken, as someone who sees a very broad picture and look for more data and economics and everything, uh, and so, if I can add another element to the question, when you look at trucking, and again, I don't know much about trucking from what I'm reading, what I know, we all expect a fundamental transformation of the industry in the next 5, 10 years due to self-driving cars and different kind of transportation. Whether it's going to work out or not, who knows? But that's the trend we're going towards, right? So, do you see that we will see the same trends as you see manufacturers with robotics and technology as we see in construction?
Well, as you know, construction is an extremely complex and diverse industry, so there is no one solution. I would say immigration reform is an important piece of it. That before the financial crisis in 2008 and the housing bust just before that, we had a lot of foreign-born workers in construction, particularly from Mexico. In the 15 years since then, the immigration has gone the other way. Mexican workers have gone home more than they've come to this country. And then, of course, the last administration really tightened up on immigration requirements, and both the Obama and Trump administration had periods of stiff enforcement against employers. So all of that has greatly reduced the number of foreign-born workers. But construction and many other industries are really running out of Americans who are getting to working age and willing to do the kinds of jobs that need filling. So immigration that opens the doors more widely to people who come in legally, want to work, that's got to be part of it. Now, you talked about automation, mechanization, and manufacturing. All of those have a role, but because every construction project is different, it's really hard to standardize and produce either machinery or components, say panels or modules or whole rooms, that can be built at a scale that will work in a lot of locations. So there certainly have been efforts to produce off-site and put things together on the site. In part, that does reduce the need for construction workers, but in part, it just transfers the need to having more specialized craft workers in a manufacturing facility, and it may add to the trucking burden that instead of bringing thousands of loads of parts and components to a construction site, you still have to bring them to a manufacturing plant, and then you have this big structure that you have to get down sometimes narrow streets and put it onto a tight construction site. So that there are ideas out there, things that will help, but they're not going to be universal solutions anywhere.
Yeah. And Ken, does AGC have a plan for how to deal with the complexity of labor? Are you lobbying for particular either loosening up the kind of strict demand for immigration issues, or what's your stand around how to resolve that issue?
Yeah, we've taken a multi-pronged support in terms of looking for legislation and federal government participation in the solution. We've been members for a long time for what's called the Essential Workers Immigration Coalition, which has crafted ideas, bills for really controlling in a positive way the kinds of immigration that we get in this country to help not just construction, but there are many other industries that are short of workers. We've also been big advocates of improving support for education and training programs, starting at school age and then going all the way up past high school graduation, so that people really have a shot at getting well trained for careers in construction instead of the old vocational ed where you had out of date shop equipment and somebody who really may not have had construction experience. We also think it's important that the government not interfere with work arrangements and not try to dictate how employers and employees engage. So the Biden administration is pushing something with the acronym the PRO Act, and we think that that would be a major step backward in terms of how employers and employees can get together to work most productively. In
Educate
terms of,
me, Ken, if you don't mind, what is this bill that you just mentioned, or that from the Biden administration? I just don't know.
yeah,
I'd
the
love to know.
Well, the PRO Act has quite a number of provisions, but the thrust of it is really to put the government's heavy thumb on the scale toward the side of favoring union arrangements and making it easier for union organizers to force workers into a union setting. But let me go beyond the federal and the legislative front. We've been active in using targeted digital media to get the word out about the job and career opportunities in construction. Our chapters, many of them, are working with local school districts, local workforce development agencies, and have a long history of doing career days and other ways that students and young adults can see what does construction work really involve, and get past those stereotypes and see that you actually can get to play with cool tools. That construction is a huge user of drones these days, of
Yeah.
GPS and laser guided equipment, and robotics. So many other ways that construction is far different from what you may have thought of when you were growing up or playing with Legos or something.
But it sounds like to me that it's a combination of many things that resolve the problem. We do know that there's a major, fast-growing problem of homelessness in the U.S., and a lot of people say there is because, if I'm remember the numbers correctly, something like 70,000 units of housing units are missing a year in the overall needs for housing, and that impacts the amount of homelessness and development. But it seems to me that it's going to be, first of all, a shift in the way people see construction industry, right? Because like you said, every mom or every other mom says, oh, my kid should go to college. And that's the message you feed the kids. And your commitment is to shift that and say, hey, what's wrong with doing something actually sophisticated, with growth, with interest, and has no technology with it, and stay what's called a blue collar job, plus robotics, plus bringing immigration, and give more flexibility. It seems like there's a lot of needs and hopefully a lot of solution to resolve that issue. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I don't want to suggest that it's either or. Construction certainly has a lot of career opportunities for people to go to college. There are really excellent construction management programs, degrees in many universities around the country. And construction is a very sophisticated business that,
Yes.
particularly in these days when sourcing materials is such a challenge, that it really helps if you have the education that help you know how to estimate quantities, know what is available out in the marketplace, how to source, and how to adapt promptly when you
Yeah.
find that something you were expecting isn't showing up when you want it.
Exactly. I'm smiling because I think that's what the biggest challenge we're dealing with as a startup is that it's so set in the old way of doing business. So on one hand, we have a fast growing followers on Instagram and others from the younger people going on construction site management, et cetera, et cetera. But the old way of doing business is you get into your pickup truck, you speed dial Johnny, the salesperson in the lumberyard, and say, Johnny, here's what I need for next week. And Johnny sometimes know you driving your pickup truck, and he doesn't, so it doesn't give you the best price, it doesn't give you the best service. One of the things we see, and they're going to give us kind of like a bridge to the next conversation, is now Johnny doesn't have enough material. So one of the things we do see is that more interest of like, let's look for what's called platform purchasing, like a mast, where you can log in like Travelocity or Expedia for traveling, where you can log in and see everybody who's flying. Let's say you want to fly to Miami, everybody's flying to Miami, and you can choose who do you want to use, how do you want to use it, and I think that's a direction. But one of the biggest challenge I must, and I can share with you, is that convincing that construction person to say, hey, why don't you try something different? Because a lot of them are so used to doing something a particular way that is different, that is old school and not involved technology. Yeah.
Yeah, well, sometimes necessity it does force change. So I think
Exactly.
more
Yeah.
businesses are learning. Hey, there's something out there called the internet where we can learn what the choices are. That
Yeah. Yeah.
as consumers, when we click on a website like Amazon and see all the different vendors for a product, so it is in the
Exactly.
B2B world that there are a
There's
lot
no
more
doubt
ways.
exactly the B2C world, they've definitely made our landing software because a lot of people are ordering toilet paper or anything from from their phone and their, fingers. So like basically that definitely opened the thing. But it leads me to the next conversation where I really want to spend a few minutes, the last few minutes we have together, about material. So let me share with you a complaint you constantly hear, okay? So when I speak with a supplier, it might be a lumberyard, plumbing supplier, electric, it doesn't matter really where I speak with them in the US. Some of them says, well, I'm really scared because I know that the big forces, the Home Depots and Amazon, everything will eventually get to my backyard and if I'm not ready. So they have the commitment, the interest to become e-commerce based or digitalize the catalog, etc. But at the same time, they said, look, I can barely take care of my current clients. All
Mhm.
I'm doing is I'm picking up the phone and I can barely find the products for people that I've been serving for the last 20 years. So you want me to expand my business right now?
Yeah.
Are you crazy? So What's your take on what's happening with material right now?
Well, it is unprecedented. I mentioned I've been doing this for 20 years, and I hear from contractors who've been in the business for twice as long that never have we seen so many items go up so steeply, so many repeated price increases, and also the supply chain disruptions. So even if you're saying, I'm willing to pay 3 times as much for that load of two by fours as I would have a year ago, you can't get it. Your lumber yard doesn't have it, or they are allocating 80% to previous customers and they don't want to hear from anybody new. And I think
Is that a COVID? Is that because we shut down the economy for not in 100%, but in reality, probably 8 to 10 months, some kind of a slowdown or shutdown completely?
definitely the pandemic is still having effects that at the beginning in the early 2020 period, we had all kinds of businesses shut down either because they had infected people were afraid to go to work, or because of a government order restricting work sites. And then for lumber in particular, and we can talk about many other materials, but lumber, you had that going on at the mills, and also the home builders. Nobody was going out to see a model home, even if they were allowed to. And so home builders, at the beginning of the spring season, when normally they'd be ordering all their lumber for the year, they canceled some of those orders. So the mills shut down even more. Well, by May of last year, people were saying, wow, I got to get a house if I'm in an apartment, or I need a bigger house, or I need to add on or remodel the house I'm in. And you had
Or
rest.
you've been sitting at home and looking at the crack on the wall, and you said I should always fix it, but I'm too busy. Now you're not
That's
busy.
right.
Like I got, and you got PPP money, so you have no money now to renovate. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's right. And you had restaurants that were building decks and railings. So there was just this huge surge of demand for lumber. Well, meanwhile, the mills couldn't necessarily get all of their workers back because they were sick or taking care of someone who was sick, or they couldn't
Well, in
send the kids
Canada,
to
across the
school, or there
border.
was daycare. On top of that, there's been a long-standing tariff on Canadian softwood lumber that has pushed up the floor price. That domestic mills are totally aware of that price, and so their price has gone up as a result. And in fact, just in the middle of May, the administration has proposed doubling that tariff, just a step in totally the wrong direction. So lumber prices just keep escalating as the demand keeps rising and the mills haven't kept up. Many other things. COVID is a big part of the story. But in addition, there are some special factors. Things coming in from Asia, the ports have been totally backed up. So at one point, there were said to be 40 ships waiting to unload off the coast of Los Angeles and Long Beach. That number came down somewhat, but it didn't mean the products were getting to you in New York, for instance. The containers were stacked higher than ever on the docks, that it was taking 11 days to get trains in, load them up, where previously it had been 1 or 2 days. And then trucking, we talked a little about that earlier. There's a truck driver shortage. That means even when the lumber is at the nearby distributor, you may not be able to get it delivered to your job site. So it's a whole host of things that mostly tie back to COVID in some way. But finally, there was a big freeze in Texas in February that lasted for many days, and it damaged all of the plants that produce the resins and other ingredients for construction plastics. So things like PVC pipe, vinyl siding, and moisture barriers, insulation, many other plastics that show up in different ways in construction, those supplies have all been drained as people use up their inventories. Now I hear that the petrochemical plants are back and running at full tilt or close to it, but there's both a physical and a figurative pipeline that needs to be filled to get the final products to the construction firm again.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Ken. It sounds to me, and I want to add another question to this. It sounds to me that this is, even though it's painful, it's temporarily. Because as 50% of the population, adult population, is being vaccinated already in the US, and we're all going back to work, and here I am in New York now walking around with a mask on, and et cetera, et cetera. More truck drivers going to go back. The PPP is going to dry out, so people are not going to be sitting at home versus actually going back to work, et cetera, et cetera. So, two things. First of all, um, how long you guys predicted? No one has a crystal ball, but you are economists, so you have
Sure.
predictions. How long do you think when we're going to see some kind of a ease on the pressure on that market? That's the first thing. And if you can also address, do you see a fundamental ease, or do you think we're going to be living in a new kind of atmosphere where people say, look, for the next few years, we constantly going to see increase of prices, inflation, and increase of demand with not enough supply?
Well, I follow the predictions and the discussions among specialists in different products, and that's what makes markets, of course, is people have different expectations about where prices are going to go next. And they've been going up and up and up even more for both lumber and steel. Copper futures hit a record a few weeks ago, and we've also just recently heard that major cement companies are all saying we're going to raise your price anywhere from $5 to $10 anytime from June 1st to September 1st. That's going to show up in the cost of ready-mix concrete and precast concrete, other products. So I don't think we're at the end of the price increases yet, but I also think that if you step back, you say, yeah, it looks like there is enough supply, enough production facilities in this country or globally. If we could get rid of the tariffs, and AGC has been lobbying to get rid of not just those Canadian softwood lumber tariffs, but 25% tariffs on our good trading partners on steel, or countries that have accepted quotas. That's even worse. You can't get it at any price. 10% on aluminum, and then thousands of specific Chinese products. We're not hurting China, we're hurting ourselves by not allowing those in. So we do think that the administration could do things immediately to help take the flame off the burner on some of these things.
Well,
But so I don't have a prediction when prices will come down, but I don't think they're going to get back to pre-pandemic levels for quite a while because demand has picked up. The forecasters that the National Association for Business Economics surveys every quarter, they're expecting this quarter, the April through June period, to have the fastest growth in GDP we've seen in 37 years. So the economy is really demanding a lot more goods, and for now, they're not available. So I think
yeah.
prices will be elevated.
And Ken, just to be a little bit more gloomy about it, I spoke with a few lumber yards who told me that one of their concerns, also not concern, but there's things they'd be aware of, is the infrastructure bill. If infrastructure basically is construction material. So if we're going to spend $2 trillion on bridges and roads and everything, the cost of that stuff is gonna hurt the local guy with a van who's buying plywood or 2x4s, because there'll be so much more than just traditional residential commercial development. There'll be a lot of infrastructure work that will keep people busy, where people are going to make more money, but at the same time, material might be even scarce even more. That's what they say.
Yeah, I would tell them not to relax completely about that, but we're a long way from having that bill passed. We don't know yet the dollar figures or the mix of project types and how quickly that money will actually be distributed. So I think that the construction industry and the supplying industries will be able to accommodate whatever eventually comes out of Congress and gets signed by the president. And of course, we're hoping it's as big as possible and as soon as possible. But realistically, it's going to take several more months before anything gets back to the White House, and more months after that before the various agencies pass it along to state or local agencies or whoever is entitled to a share of it, and then still more months before actual projects are awarded and the contractors put in the orders. So I don't think that's a major concern. But let me put in a plug now. I write a weekly one-page summary of economic news relevant to construction, and I think it's a way people can keep up with the economic information that can make them better informed. AGC has also put together now 2 issues and probably a third one coming of what we call the Construction Inflation Alert. It's just a simple 8-page guide for owners, for public officials, for media to understand what's happening with the various materials and the supply chain issues. And so I'd be glad to add anybody to the email list for
Of
the
course,
Data
absolutely. Ken,
Digest.
how do we find it? Do we find it on the AGC website or do we find,
They
yeah, because
can.
I want our listeners and our viewers and our, 8,000 followers on Instagram, which are going to see a segments of that. I want them to know about it. So how do they find your newsletter?
Well, if you have a pencil ready or you're typing fast,
I will make sure that the team puts it in the bottom of the screen, so no
great.
problem.
Okay. Ken.Simonson, Simonson, at agc.org. Or if you can
Perfect.
just remember the letters agc.org, go to the website and you'll see a host of material.
Oh, that's great. So last question, Ken. So taking the 20 years experience you have, the experience you had before that, your background in the academia and at the same time dealing with construction, give me a little bit of your personal futuristic image or a picture of how construction world would look like in 10 years from now or 15 years from now. I would love to hear that.
Well, one thing that I think is changing, we certainly see it in the population data, that US population growth has slowed a lot. It showed up in the Census Bureau figures a month ago for the whole decade, but even within that decade, population growth slowed by about half. And at the moment, it's even slower, it's almost static. And so that means slower growth of demand for housing, for the infrastructure like streets and underground utilities that are connected with new developments, also with public structures, whether it's schools or police stations or libraries, and slower growth of revenue for the local governments. So a lot of implications there. Second, some of the things that we saw shift during the pandemic, they're going to stay with us. The shift from retail to e-commerce, that started long before, but it certainly accelerated, and that's added to demand for distribution structures, whether they're that so-called last mile or last hour structure that lets you order in the morning and have it show up on your doorstep the same day. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
But also cold storage and the big fulfillment centers at or near airports that feed that stuff to the local ones. And then healthcare is changing. Hospitals had to keep patients away who had elective surgery. So many kinds of out of hospital special care facilities are springing up. We have an aging population. We have, unfortunately, some people with long COVID symptoms, and yet nursing homes seem a lot less safe than they used to. And so we're looking for new ways of delivering chronic care. And then the shift in energy demand, whether it's driven by the administration, the federal administration, by states, or by businesses that want to appear more green, there's going to be much more growth in demand for wind, for solar, offshore wind in states like New England and mid-Atlantic states. And that will require a whole bunch of transmission of battery storage, because the wind and the sun don't deliver electricity when it's and where it's needed necessarily. And also manufacturing plants to supply the parts for those turbines and those solar fields and for the batteries. And then the shift to electric vehicles. Not sure how quickly either businesses or will use electric trucks or individuals will choose electric, but we know there's going to be a lot more investment in the vehicles and in the battery charging stations. Again, all of that requires manufacturing plants for those. So a lot of ways that construction will be changing over the next decade, even before you layer on the possibility of massive increased investment in infrastructure and infrastructure investments in types that we didn't see money before.
Yeah, that's great. Ken, it's been nothing but a pleasure.
Okay.
I really love the conversation, giving us a much broader, kind of pulling us out from our how do I get my hand on a 2x4 to the bigger picture. So, and I'm a big fan of AGC, so I'll make sure that we plug in and people can really use it. One of the commitment that a MAST has, we say we stand for three things called TIC: transparency, integrity, community. We have a whole section on our website which is meant for community where we post articles so people can, because I found that unless you work for huge construction companies, it's a very lonely industry, and there's not too much best practice. There's a lot of like, that's what I learned from my dad, or that's what I learned when I started work for someone else. So we're trying to shift that to more education, more expanding of better way to do, better way to save money, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you've been a major milestone in that commitment we have. So I really appreciate your time, and
You're
please
welcome.
keep in touch, and we'll make sure to post it. Okay. I really thank you for your time, Ken. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye
You
bye.
bet.
Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.